And apparently, I couldn't hear it, but the audience could hear people going, 8! 8! But I know how to count up to 12 now.
Hello and welcome to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. I'm Laura East.
And I'm Luke Plimmer.
Each episode takes a look at a different aspect of the wonderful world of amateur theatre and features an amateur theatre maker talking about their theatrical life, theatrical loves and the times when they've died on stage. Our Backstage Pass Holder, John O'Neill, will also take us behind the scenes at the Crescent Theatre, Birmingham, to discover more about what goes into making a great amateur production.
Today's episode explores adaptation, the art of taking a book and turning it into a play. We'll be interviewing Alan Marshall, actor, director and adaptor of novels for the stage, to find out about his life and loves in amateur theatre. Meanwhile, John will be going behind the scenes on the Crescent Theatre's forthcoming production of The Lovely Bones, Bryony Lavery's stage adaptation of the best-selling novel by Alice Sebold.
Now, this month, you may hear a difference in audio quality with Luke's interview with Alan Marshall. Our marvellous sound editor Kevin can do many things, but he can't fix the recording made by two presenters who set up the wrong microphone during sound checks. Oops. However, Alan was a delightful guest, and we hope you enjoy listening. The show must go on.
Alan, tell us about your first love.
Theatre.
Yes.
I love theatre, yes. It is, apart from listening to music, I suppose, and going to the theatre, being involved in the theatre is top of the list, really.
Absolutely. Awesome. What's been the love of your theatrical life? So is there like a standout moment in your time of theatre, maybe?
It's difficult to say because I've always been very picky about the things I do. So I've loved them all, really, for all sorts of reasons, not just because of the play. I always fall in love with casts. I just can't help it. They just amaze me with their talent. So I pinch all their ideas and say they're mine.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing to do. I just love casts and technicians. I don't know where they come from.
Yeah.
I just think they're fabulous. So it's always a great experience.
Yeah, awesome. So can you tell us about the one that got away?
There hasn't ever been anything. This is terrible. I've always seemed to get what I wanted to do because I always was, as I said, very picky. I didn't go for everything. I chose the ones that I'd got a burning ambition to do. There are still ones I want to do, although I think time is running out.
Say that.
But no, there is not one that got away. There's a song that got away.
Oh.
We did a show years ago, which was a compilation of songs.
Sure. Yeah.
One of which I was desperate to sing because I loved it. And it was the original version of White Christmas. I'm sorry. Which has a really interesting introduction because it's all about here I am in Hawaii or something, and it's hot and sweaty, and I'm in the army, and all I want is to be home for Christmas.
Sure.
And then you go into the bit we know.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'd love to sing that. And it went to somebody else, and I really hated him forever.
Well, you never know. If you do the Wassail one year, they might bring you back. That could be your opportunity. You never know.
There's a lot to pay to do that. I think the directing, it's always the one that I really want to do, that I've got the burning ambition to do. Acting, you're so often glad to be in something, aren't you? And very often people I don't know if you've experienced this, they think you're going for the other thing. Way back, we did Sweeney Todd, and the director apologised and said, I'm sorry, I couldn't give you Sweeney. And I didn't want Sweeney at all. I wasn't interested in Sweeney. So, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The one that didn't get away.
The one that, no, he tried to, but I didn't want it.
Excellent. So can you tell us about a time when you've died on stage?
Yes, I can. How much time have you got? It was becoming a life's habit. Yes, I had a period of time when I didn't do any theatre for about 8 years because of the day job. I just couldn't fit it in. And then when I came back, it was to a production of a play called Dick Barton. You won't know Dick Barton. It was a radio production for many years. just after the war, and he was a kind of James Bond character.
Okay.
And this production of Dick Barton was a reasonably new script to a ridiculous storyline about an evil German who was going to take over Britain by poisoning the tea. And he was going to do it at midnight on New Year. And he was on the roof of Big Ben.
Right.
As the clock chimed, I was going 1, 2, 3. I got to 7 and froze. I'd only got to get to 12. The prompt, and we had prompts in those days, unfortunately had got ear devices on to stop her being deafened by the gunshot that was about, because he gets shot on 12. So that was, and apparently I couldn't hear it, but the audience could hear people going, 8! 8! But I know how to count up to 12 now.
Good.
I've learned. Yes, that was a classic, I think.
Oh dear. So you've talked about how you might perform on stage, but also that you like to direct. So what is it that calls you to directing, do you think, that makes you want to direct as opposed to being on the stage itself?
For me, it's the most creative thing. I don't have a great deal of confidence in my imagination when I'm acting what to do. But as a director, I do love seeing what others do. I feel I learn a lot from it. I love getting things on stage. I particularly love a kind of fantasy element, being able to put in things that an audience might not expect, which is why I've tended to go, I suppose, no, Shakespeare, you can have the time of your life with imagination with that. Christmas shows, musicals, they're all things in which you can let the presentation go where you want it to go without destroying it. I don't think I've ever tried to turn something inside out and say, oh, I'm going to set Oklahoma in a Chinese laundry run by nuns.
On the moon.
No, I've always tried to be sensitive to the production. Only once has it ever really failed on me. Okay. And that was my fault, nobody else's. But it's that element of being, you can be really creative. Even plays, I have done plays that don't have massive choruses, that have small casts, and I've loved those as much.
Sure.
Because you really do see what actors can do with the material they're given and how they make it live. It's all about me taking credit for everybody else.
Do you think that with when you talked about like you like to subvert like expectations of an audience, do you think that when you have a show that's possibly like less well known, do you think that you have more? Do you feel more inspired, or do you feel like you're more able to take risks there? Or
I think if it's less well known, I always like to reinforce the story.
Yeah.
Make sure that the storyline is clear. I did Hamlet, and there's a lot you can do with Hamlet, and all I wanted to do was get a blooming great yarn over to the audience. I think we can be confused by the intellectual academics sometimes. It's all right for those who can do it. I've never been accused of that. But the plays that I've done which focused on the acting, I found as enjoyable as ones that needed flashing lights and explosions.
Sure.
Because you get the flashing lights, you get the explosions from the performers. They do it for you. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like you've mentioned that you've directed lots of different productions. Do you have any particular standouts? Are there any like ones that you've enjoyed directing, or you think, you know, any moments that you think have been the highlights?
Yeah, I've done quite a few musicals. I always enjoy those because I can't believe we're ever going to get them on stage, and there's all that stuff. The outstanding one for me, I don't know if it's the most recent, was The Wizard of Oz, because we survived for 2 years wondering whether it was going to happen. We'd got to the end-ish of Act 1, and then everything stopped literally overnight. And when they let us come back 18 months later,
something like that, yeah,
we could only have 6 to rehearse at a time, which wasn't so bad with The Wizard of Oz, because it starts off with lots of small scenes between the different people that Dorothy meets. But there comes a point where you need to have all the Munchkins, and we couldn't have those, and all of the others. The Munchkins had grown, and some members of the cast, their lives had changed, so we had to recast, and ended up with a brilliant cast, and we got it on stage, and I thought that was a huge success for us. So that is an outstanding one.
So sometimes as a director, you find yourself adapting like pre-existing material, such as novels or maybe true stories. What do you think an adaptation needs in order to be successful?
Needs to be true to the story.
Yeah.
The ones that I've done have always been to novels that are being studied at GCSE or A-level. Dickens crops up quite a lot. And that's not easy because you're never quite sure what you should miss out and what you should put in. Because like Shakespeare, you edit Shakespeare and you know that the bit you've cut out is going to be some child's favourite bit and they're going to go home feeling deprived. But I do think, when you are doing an adaptation, it has got to be so like the book. I have seen Christmas Carol done as a 1950s production, and it worked brilliantly for me because it was all about my childhood, so I was there with it. It got panned. I was the only person who liked it. You have to be really, really truthful. I think, I don't know, perhaps you haven't. People of a certain age have grown up with the BBC's close to reality, everything, all the detail.
Yeah.
And I think when you're doing something like a Dickens, detail is so important.
Yeah.
Having said that, I did Great Expectations, and you'd think all the detail would be in the props. So we got rid of all the props. We used no props at all. We didn't have a set.
Defying expectations.
We had, but it was all about the acting and the costume.
Yeah.
And that worked. And sound.
Yeah.
No projections.
Nice. Must have been a good tech rehearsal.
Well,
must have been an easy one. Must have been easy, I guess.
There were times when Miss Havisham didn't quite go up in flames as successfully as she should have done. It was brilliantly done, except sometimes the smoke machine didn't work, so it just looked as if she was in a disco having a little dance. Anyway.
Would you say that those are the types of adaptation that prove more challenging than others, or are there any others that might be more challenging?
I've only ever worked once with somebody else's. I've always done my own, which is arrogant, but then I know what I want to put in.
Nothing arrogant about that. It is...
There are so many words that you can use.
Yeah.
Just get on with it.
Yeah.
Filter it through. I'm just working on one at the moment, which I've loved. It was my lockdown thing. I don't think it'll ever get performed, but it kept me going. It made me happy. So.
Sure. Can you tell us a bit more about this lockdown passion project?
Yes, it's something that I was a teacher, and it was something that I did with drama club at school. It's based on 2 short stories by Oscar Wilde,
Nice.
The Happy Prince and The Young King. And I worked it so that they become the same thing. The Young King becomes the Happy Prince statue. Yeah. It's about how he gets to be famous and all of that. So, yes, the first part is very, very, very true to the story, the incidents, not the dialogue. I didn't use the dialogue because Oscar Wilde is a bit rich. But the second one, I've based it around a school party that have gone to the city where the statue is and their experiences there. It follows the story with the swallow and the statue and all the good deeds he does, but it's sort of seen through this school party and that things really haven't changed much.
Your next directing project with the Crescent Theatre is The Pitman Painters. So can you tell us briefly what that's about?
Yeah, it's a true story. 1934, Ashington, which is not that far from Newcastle. Funny accent they do, which is going to be one of our problems, doing the accent training. It's a true story about a group of miners in Ashington. Ashington at the time had nothing, no library, no hospital, nothing. And this group of miners, through the WEA, the Workers' Education Association, which I think was a national thing, they decided they wanted to better themselves. They'd had no opportunity of doing that. They left school, I think some of them as early as 11th, and the expectation was down the mines. And they decided they wanted to improve themselves. So I think, if I remember rightly, they did 5 years having weekly lectures on evolution. And then they wanted to branch out into economy.
Right.
And the man who turned up to do economy wasn't from economy at all. He was an art lecturer who came along and started talking to them. They said, we better get on with it anyway. So he came along and started talking about the famous paintings in the world. Here's a picture of the Sistine Chapel. Here's this, that, and the other. And they said, what's this got to do with us? And he decided the best thing was, do your own. Get on and do your own paintings. And so they started painting, and over a period of time became famous as painters. It's very, very uplifting story. It moves me every time, because these men would turn up in their suits and ties and paint, and they were very proper. They liked a rigorous organisation. They paid a tanner a session, and if you hadn't got your tan, one of them gets into trouble because you're not really a mechanic, you're not really an engineer. And they say, well, he is, he's a dental mechanic. And so, the humour is absolutely lovely.
Yeah.
And when people try to lure them away from the mines and become full-time painters, they said, no, this is our community. This is what we are. This is where we belong. And that's what they did. Because all of their pictures were about the community, the pigeon loft, the fish and chip shop on a Saturday, down the mines, men going into work, everything, the greyhounds that they loved. So they were really, really fabulous, fabulous people. Mm. And it came to an end in 1984 when the mines were closed. Mm. I don't know whether Ashington has really recovered from that, because they all work down the mines.
You talk about how it's an uplifting story. Is that what drew you to it in the first place?
Pitman Painters has been around, the play has been around for a long time. So what drew me to it was, first of all, getting the script and reading it and thinking, what is this, really? And loving the script. It took me a long time to find the humour, to be quite honest. It is very... from that area. The delivery is the important thing. The rhythm, the pace, the way they speak. And then I watched a few clips from the National Theatre production, which set it all off, and thought, we can do better than that. It's called arrogance. But it just seemed that they shouted at you. I don't know if people from Ashington do shout at one another all the time. But it's the kind of banter that men who work closely together do. It's just part of the way it's not insulting. They just talk to one another in that style, and I love it, I think.
Yeah?
It's really got to me, yes.
Good.
There are only 2 women's roles, of which I won't give one away because it will wreck the story. One was a P&O heiress, and she was the one who said she bought some of the paintings and then tried to persuade one of them to give up and become a full-time painter. She would keep him in money.
Well, you seem to have a lot of passion and excitement for it, so we look forward to seeing that as time progresses. Thanks so much, Alan, for coming onto the podcast. It's been wonderful to speak to you. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
John's currently backstage at the Crescent Theatre. What's going on, John?
I'm here in wardrobe at the Crescent Theatre, surrounded by thousands of costumes, and I'm also with 2 hard-rehearsing actors who are currently working on the Crescent Theatre's January 2022 production of The Lovely Bones, which opens on January the 29th and runs until February the 5th in the main house. The Lovely Bones is an adaptation of the novel of the same name by Alice Sebold. It's been adapted for the stage by Bryony Lavery and premiered as recently as 2018 and has toured the country professionally in the intervening period. The Crescent are excited to be the first amateur company to produce and stage this play themselves. Sat with me now are Oliver Jones and Charlotte Thompson, two integral parts of this exciting modern production. Hello both.
Hello.
Hiya, thanks for having us.
Let's start with an introduction of the characters you're playing.
So I'm playing Mr. George Harvey, the antagonist of the piece, and I mean it's not really a spoiler to give it away, but he rapes and murders the main character, Charlotte's character, Susie Salmon, pretty much at the immediate start of the play. And his character throughout the play, it's kind of just how he's trying to enjoy getting away with this crime, and you find out a bit more about him and his past, if he's done this before, that kind of thing. And yeah, he's a wretched person.
That's true. So Susie is the storyteller, basically. And as Ollie said, the play starts with her being raped and murdered. But it's not really about that overall. It's about her coming to terms with her own death and watching her family from heaven and seeing how they deal with it. But she's 14, and throughout the play, she kind of mourns what she could have had. She watches her family grow up without her, like her siblings, and how they move on and get married and do all the things she wanted to do. So
yeah, and one of the key things for an audience who's new to this piece to understand is that the lead character is dead.
Yeah.
So
she's dead. Yeah,
we're talking about somebody who's in the afterlife, looking down at what remains of her family on Earth. So it's an interesting paradigm right to begin with. This play is a relatively new piece. It's been around since only 2018. It's billed as a unique coming-of-age tale that captured the hearts of millions of readers, an unforgettable play about life after loss. What's unique about the character and the loss she's facing? We've covered it a little bit in terms of who the character is and where she is, but in terms of how the play delivers that to the audience, what's unique about that?
Well, to begin with, I'd say, talking about her loss, you've touched on that already. The way she looks down and sees what she'll never have and what she doesn't become. She has effectively, lost her life, but lost her childhood and her innocence. And I think that's a thing that, through this story, victims would be able to relate to this being alive, because it's in effect it's the same thing that's happened to people. If they're raped or things happen like that, traumatic events, you are robbed of your childhood in essence, aren't they? And it's having to cope and move on from that. Susie has the unique perspective of she's dead and she's also trying to cope in the same way. So you see her reacting, her sort of the way she is afterwards, her emotions and things like that are exactly the same as what they would be if she was alive anyway. But it's
and she comes to terms with it in the end, that she is dead and her family are happy now and they've moved on as well. So her story is a happy story, really. In the end, you don't expect it to be when it starts out with a rape and murder, but actually in the end it's quite nice, really.
And how does the fact that you are dead and you're interacting with characters who are alive, how does the staging approach that? How do you approach that? How is the audience going to get that?
Well, I think it has been a challenge because it's hard to act and have no one react to you. And also, I think for other actors, it's hard for them to not look at me when I'm speaking. We've had quite a few times where people have just looked straight at me. So we've really worked on focusing on that and how they just have to ignore me, basically. And it's been a challenge. But I've quite enjoyed it. And staging-wise, I can do what I want, basically. Like, I can run in between them.
Oh, right. So you're free to roam the stage and roam around the scenes of the living characters.
Yeah, Rod was kind of clear that he didn't... I mean, there are times when there's two levels to the staging. So there are times when I'm up above watching down, but there are also times when I am just running around, and he wanted it to be like that rather than she's in heaven, she's above us all, and she won't interact with anyone.
And Rod's the director.
Yes, Rod's the director.
Right, great. And Ollie, this play has a very modern style, which we were talking about a little bit already. Realist conventions are left at the auditorium door. Time and place are often fluid. Short scenes are weaved together in what can feel like multi-dimensional space. And a character's dialogue is never longer than 1 or 2 lines before it's passed on to the next actor. Can you tell us more about that and the challenges of learning and rehearsing The Lovely Bones?
Yeah, so I think it's one of the stronger points of this play is the dialogue, and by that I don't mean necessarily the intelligence of the dialogue, but just more the way it's made to ebb and flow and bounce off each other like a natural conversation. So as you said, there's only like you get a couple of lines and then someone else will come in, and there's not really any sort of monologuing. Susie's the closest person that gets that when you're talking to yourself or talking to people and not having them react. But even then, you're trying to engage in a conversation, aren't you, with these characters, and they just, you're dead, so they can't interact back. It makes it harder to learn the lines because obviously you can't learn anything in blocks. Then you have to constantly rely on the cues, make sure you keep knowing things, and you're not there waiting for a cue, waiting for someone to say the lines that you can say yours. You've just got to be there to really try and make it as natural as you can. One of the things that happens a lot throughout the play as well, because she's dead, is there's a lot of this time passing as well and things happening at the same time on the stage. And so you get a sort of TV-esque feel to it at times where you just have to keep switching your focus as an audience member, and you could be looking at Harvey 1 second speaking to a policeman, and then quickly you're in the Salmons living room watching the family argue over dinner and Christmas time and things like that. So yeah, the dialogue.
How have you approached that in terms of spacing? So there's all these different locations and you're jumping from location to location, and sometimes you're also moving through time as you jump from one location to another. Sometimes you're moving off planet Earth entirely. And how is that plotted on the stage? Are places fluid, or does each location always take place in the same
They're
part
always
of
in the
stage?
same, aren't they? So like the Salmon's family home is always in the same place. Harvey's home is always in the same place. But then they can change, like the whole stage could be the cornfield where she was murdered. So, but those main places are always in the same space.
And that's to sort of orientate the audience, so they know if a scene is taking place in this part of the stage with these characters, and probably with a particular lighting plot, we don't know yet, then they know it's that location.
Yeah.
And that helps them.
Yeah, because it's very complicated.
Yeah.
So just those little things will hopefully help them to understand what's actually going on.
And Charlotte, your character is on stage more or less the whole time. What are you currently doing in the rehearsal room? Like, what will you be rehearsing today? And how are you personally facing the challenge of the form of the piece? Ollie, you've said already, instead of having a few cue lines to learn because the dialogue's so short, you're having to multiply the number of cue lines and kind of more be in the moment and pick up your lines that way. How is it for you, Charlotte? So
today we're going to do a run of the whole show. In terms of learning lines, it has been so hard because I don't really, obviously because no one responds to me, I find it really hard to learn my lines because I'm not in conversation with many people. So that's been tricky. And like Ollie said, I just have to be aware of the cues.
When it comes to you, you're changing the subject. Those are always the most difficult lines to learn.
Yeah.
If somebody asks you a question in the dialogue and you answer the question, that's an easy one. But if it gets to you and it's like, right, now we're just changing the subject entirely, you've got to remember all those subject changes.
Yeah, because as well, like, time passes. And she like, there's a line that she says, things are moving on or something. Like, she's not aware of what's going on. Do you know what I mean? Like, she's not there the whole time watching everything. So she comes back and sees how things have moved on, and it's really tricky to learn. But I've kind of just got used to listening to people's cues, but I am not off book yet.
Right. And how far off you?
Well, I know the gist of all the scenes, but I probably know act one. I'd be okay probably off the book with a few cues, but I'm too scared.
Yeah, so at the moment, it's still a crutch.
Yeah,
you're still
definitely
walking around with your crutch.
Yeah, because of the pace is so quick as well. I don't want to hold things up by asking for cues. So, but by the time we come back in January, I will be off book. Rod.
Yeah, we did a stagger through on Thursday, didn't we?
Yeah.
And like you were saying, that the pace It took everyone by surprise, didn't it? Just like once we were doing it, how quick it was, just flew through.
It's really staccato because of the short lines. It's bang, 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 this scene, that scene, bang, 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 and you really sort of have to, you have to hold on. It's a white knuckle ride, isn't it, in some cases? And I'm sure as an actor trying to deliver that, it's even more so.
And there's not many moments of stillness, but when there are, they're really powerful, I think, because there's always something going on, and then it's like bang, this is a calm moment for once. So it's really interesting.
And what's your normal line learning technique? Every actor's got one.
Well, I've always been quite good at learning lines, but that's when people have actually been talking to me. For this one, I've recorded myself for each scene and just been listening to it in the car on the way.
Yeah. And I've heard of quite a lot of actors say they tend to record their lines, and that's the way they do it.
Like a song.
Yeah, and get it in that way. And I presume both of you have enjoyed acting previous to this play. Can you briefly tell us how you got here, a summary of your acting journeys, and what keeps you turning up to the rehearsal room?
Charlotte?
Okay, me first. So I studied acting at Stratford College, and then I studied acting at the London College of Music in Ealing. And then when I came to the end of my training, they were kind of like, to all of us, the chances of any of you making it are very small. So I kind of resigned myself to the fact that I wouldn't be professional. But I always wanted to keep doing acting because it's what I love to do. And so after that, I was training to be a teacher, but I kept up with amateur stuff. I joined the Crescent Theatre in Ealing, which is quite well known, I think, and played Daisy in Daisy Pulls It Off, which was another really big part, but again, she had people talking to her because she wasn't dead, so it wasn't as hard. And then I moved back to Birmingham and joined the Crescent, and I started with Midsummer Night's Dream with Ollie. And then since then I just love it, and I love the Crescent as well. Like, it just feels like a family, and everyone's so welcoming. And every time you're cast in a new show, you always get nervous that, like, you know, it's not going to be the same, but it always is. Everyone's always welcoming, and it's just amazing. I love it.
Brilliant, thank you. Ollie?
Well, like most, I guess I've just always been drawn to acting. I did it when I was a child, and I think I looked to my dad quite a bit because he used to be an actor when he was a teenager. He was in the West End and things like that, and he was getting quite sort of big, and then, you know, life happens, things don't go according to plan. And so, like, I used to watch him as well when I was younger. I actually used to perform some of the stages around Birmingham at the Rep and things like that, and I used to watch him, and I was just really like, you know, I need to do this, I need to get into this. I need to have that presence on stage and have, like, all eyes on me kind of thing. It was it felt like a calling to me, being the centre of attention. Yeah. Doesn't sound like me, does it? And then I didn't actually do it. I was going to go to drama school, but I didn't end up going in the end. I had too many people kind of turning my head and saying, you know, don't end up like your dad, that kind of thing, as a failed actor.
It can be a challenge. I think that happens to a lot of young people, particularly young people from backgrounds that aren't massively wealthy. You will have older members of the family sometimes say, you know, don't do it. It's not financially viable. It's going to make things difficult.
Yeah, well, I was like going to be the first person from the family, like, in the entire history to get to university, and so they were very adamant that it's not like a wasted chance kind of thing there. So I ended up doing, like, engineering, but honestly, that is something. It's probably one of the biggest regrets I have, is just not following it and just, you know, following the passion for those years back then, because everything I've done since I could have done anyway if I'd done acting. Like, there's nothing that I've done where it's a good job I didn't do acting, you know. And so really, I did it then at university, like on the side, sort of amateur stuff on the side. Did a few plays there. Favourite one was Important to Be in Earnest. That was my favourite one that I did at university. I played Algernon Moncrief, and then a couple of years passed when I got back from university, as I was trying to sort of get my life together and jobs and things like that. And then eventually I came to an audition at the Crescent, and that was 2018, I think. And I've just been here since then, doing a couple of plays each year and helping out and everything, as all the members have to and do. And yeah, it's great that I'm just doing it again. It feels great to be doing the passion. I think my two biggest passions are like acting and football, and they're basically what takes up my entire free time.
Perfect life.
Yeah.
And this is to either of you again. The play The Lovely Bones is an adaptation of a very successful book. A novel and a play are two very different beasts in terms of art forms. Have either of you read the book? And if you have, how does it compare to the play? What has been retained, lost, or added to by the adaptation?
Okay, well, I haven't read it, but I've listened to it on an audiobook. I've got through the whole thing, drive a lot for work, so it's been an easy way for me to consume it. And it's a really good book, isn't it?
In the script, the lines are basically all taken from the book, completely. But obviously those lines can't make sense by themselves, so we have to do a lot of work to try and make it make sense to the audience. If they just heard those lines and didn't know what was going on, it would just be very confusing. So, yeah. But reading the book has helped.
Yeah.
And therefore, so we need to work hard to make sure that the audience actually know what's going on most of the time.
Yeah, the book's been pretty invaluable as well as actors, because it gives you the background on your characters, like which the play obviously doesn't give. It's very hard in that space of time. Obviously, you go through the book and read it. That can be 11, 12 hours of reading a book, whereas this is a very condensed version.
Yeah.
And one of the drawbacks, I think, for my character in particular, is you don't find out really any of his his history, like his motives, I guess, that sort of thing. Whereas in the book, it does deal with that, and you get a sense of why things happen. And so, you know, as an actor, you've got to use that. Then use the book, use the source material to kind of to find out where you're going as an actor, as the character in the play. But yeah, sometimes it's a bit like, it's a shame that you don't get to show the audience the other parts that are missing.
And I suppose that's the challenge for the playwright, is you've got to distill hundreds and hundreds of pages into much less pages.
Yeah.
You've got to get rid of all the description and the interior monologues and just have dialogue. And like you say, you're going to have to try and flesh out all of that with the staging that goes around the dialogue, and that full picture is what is going to give the audience the meaning that is within the novel.
Exactly, yeah.
Great stuff. And finally, I don't know if you've listened to any of the other podcasts, but regular listeners will know that we like to roast our guests over some friendly trivia. You two are no exception. You are equals, I'm sure, on the stage, but in the realm of trivia, only one of you will reign supreme. The lovely Amateur of Life and Death podcast team have concocted this episode's trivia quiz just for you, aptly titled Stage or Page. We've taken the titles of some well-known novels and replaced one word with the word amateur. For example, the Amateur Bones. For each title that follows, can you A, identify the correct title, and B, say whether it has been adapted for the stage or remained just on the page by responding with either stage or page. There are 2 points available for each title and 3 titles each. Is that clear?
Yeah, it's clear.
Good. It's confusing for me. So, Oliver, the first one is for you, and I'm going to keep score. I have a pen.
I've said this before, I'm not a very well-read actor, I don't think.
Don't worry, if it goes wrong, it just means you lose. So, ready? Title number 1. Can you please tell me the correct title? Love in the Time of Amateurs.
Nope. I cannot.
The correct title is Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Who knew? Now, has that title stayed on the page or been adapted for the stage? Love in the Time of Cholera, is that stage or page?
I'm going to go for page.
I'm afraid this novel has been adapted for the stage, and the play version premiered off-Broadway in 2012. So that's no points for you,
Great
Oliver.
start, good start.
Great
Good
start. Charlotte, you're already in the lead. Can you capitalise on it? Please tell me the correct title? The Amateur of Wildfell Hall.
I'm just going to guess. Mystery.
Good guess, but wrong. The correct title is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. The Bronte sisters. Now, has The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, has it stayed on the page or been adapted for the stage? That's stage or page.
Page.
I'm afraid it's stage.
Yes.
The novel has been adapted twice for the stage, most recently in 2017.
Well, we're doing
Oliver?
really well.
The listeners are loving this. This is 0, 0, 0.
Oliver, this is back to you. This is your chance to take the lead. The Amateur Maid's Tale.
The Handmaid's Tale.
Correct.
Oh.
That's 1 point.
Oh,
Now, has The Handmaid's Tale stayed on the page or been adapted for the stage?
Oh, yeah, it's been adapted for TV. I'll go for stage as well. Adapted. Oh, my.
Page, I'm afraid. As far as we know, the novel has never been adapted for the stage, or at least never in a version that has been performed in the UK. But there are popular film and television versions. So, Oliver, you do have 1 point. I'm going to write
Well
that
done.
down.
We're off the mark.
Charlotte,
Yep.
your title is Tinker Tailor Amateur Spy.
Soldier.
Correct. 1 point. Now, has Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, has that stayed on the page or been adapted for the stage?
Stage.
I'm afraid
Oh my
not.
God.
It stayed on the page. There have been successful film and television adaptations, but the spy thriller has never been produced on stage. But there is 1 point for you, so well
Wait.
done.
This is a close contest.
1 point each. Oliver, your next title, and indeed your final title, is The Curious Incident of the Amateur in the Night Time.
Curious incident.
I know.
Oh, dear.
If he gets it wrong, can I steal the point?
If it's a tie break, yes.
The...
Can I give you a clue? There are
Yes,
lots
please.
of them in the play you're in. No.
Bones.
No, good guess. It's not the curious incident of the bones in the night time. It's the curious incident of the dog in the night
Oh,
time.
how
Lots of dogs,
embarrassing.
isn't there?
This is embarrassing.
Now, has that novel stayed on the page or been adapted for the stage? Stage or page?
Stage.
Correct. That's 1 point. The novel was successfully adapted into a play version by Simon Stevens, which premiered in 2012 and is returning for a 10th anniversary tour of the UK in 2022.
It's a great play. Really
So
good.
that's 1 point for you. You're on 2 points.
Pressure's on now, Charlotte.
Okay.
Charlotte, this is your final title. Are you ready?
I'm so ready.
The Amateur Patient.
The something patient. The mental patient.
Good guess. It's not the mental patient. It's the correct title is The English Patient by Michael Odatji.
Well, who knows that?
And is that a novel that has stayed on the page or been adapted for the stage? That's stage or page?
Page.
Correct.
Yes.
An Oscar-winning film adaptation was released in 1997, but the novel has never been adapted for the stage. So that's 1 point for you.
Wait.
So it's a draw. You will reign supreme together in the world of podcast trivia.
So what's the lowest score you've had? Is it 2
Is it
points?
2?
No, I think we've had people with lower points than that. I think we've had zeros.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
in
That's
the
all right
past.
then.
So you've actually done quite well. That's a difficult quiz. That's one of our more difficult quiz. Oliver, Charlotte, thank you so much for talking to me and our podcast audience, and I can't wait to see the Lovely Bones. I think it's going to be a really exciting piece. So thank you both.
Thank you.
you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, John. Take a look at any theatre, from Broadway to Bradford to Birmingham, and the likelihood is that at least one of the plays in their season will have been adapted from a novel. The Colour Purple, War Horse, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time, Matilda, Wicked, all smash hits based on best-selling novels or works of classic literature. The 4 longest-running productions on the West End stage to date, The Mousetrap, The Phantom of the Opera, Les Miserables, and The Woman in Black, were adapted from novels and see no sign of slowing down yet. So how did we get here?
Theatrical adaptations of novels really hit the ground running in the Victorian era. The 1830s and 40s saw many unlicensed adaptations of the novels to the stage. The lax nature of British copyright laws meant that novels were not covered by the existing legislation, and so were fair game for adaptation. Add to this a population boom brought on by the Industrial Revolution, and with it the greater demand for entertainment from the masses, and playwrights and theatre companies found themselves scrambling for anything new and exciting, often turning to novels for inspiration. Many popular novels at the time were serialised in monthly or weekly periodicals like Bentley's Miscellany.
Readers, desperate to get their fix of the next chapter but unable to wait, could instead be persuaded to visit the theatre for an unofficial adaptation with a completely different ending. This happened often to the works of Charles Dickens, whose novel The Pickwick Papers was staged without his approval 26 times in 1838. As new technology such as electric lighting and hydraulics emerged, staging and set design could be more ambitious and create visual spectacles that could more closely resemble novels with imaginative fantasy settings.
Come to the 20th century, and the flourishing theatre scenes in London and New York meant that novelists such as John Steinbeck were writing their novels with an eye on theatrical adaptation. The 1937 novella of Mice and Men, for example, was written in the hope that it could flourish as a successful Broadway adaptation. Spoiler, it did.
In recent years, audiences have also expressed an appetite for stories that, while not directly based on a beloved novel, might be set in the same universe. Take, for example, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, or the recent play La Belle Sauvage, adapted by Philip Pullman from his own sequel to his Dark Materials. Could this be linked in part to the trend in popular culture for sequels, prequels, and wider cinematic or televisual universes such as Marvel?
For theatre makers, investing in a script based on a beloved novel seems like a surefire way to get bums on seats, granting you access to a ready-made fanbase obsessed with the original work. But what about when it goes wrong? One of the most disastrous flops in Broadway history was the 1988 musical Carrie. This musical was based on Stephen King's horror novel of the same name, about a young girl with telekinetic powers. Anyone who has read the novel knows it is an atmospheric tale about the struggles of puberty and growing up, but the musical, not so much. In this production, a Greek chorus is inserted into the storyline. Carrie's teenage bullies sing a cheery song about pig's blood, and Carrie's ability to move objects with her minds was either massively played down or made funny by lacklustre practical effects. And the production closed after just 5 performances at a cost of $8 million. But it gained a devoted cult following.
As Carrie the musical shows, this is risky stuff. A brilliant novel does not necessarily make a great play. The two are very different creatures. A book offers the opportunity to fill your mind with characters and new worlds, to take your time, to read as much or as little as you please. The joys of theatre are communal. As playwright Mike Poulton, who has adapted Wolf Hall among many other novels, argues, in a play, you cannot afford to pause and reflect. You want people to be sitting on the edge of their seats. It's a completely different dynamic.
So, is it possible to adapt a novel for the stage in a way that is truly satisfying, or perhaps the point is to make something new?
How will playwrights going forward use the novel adaptation to ask questions that resonate with the post-pandemic UK of 2021? How do we reimagine classic stories in compelling and unusual ways? Maybe, in the reimagining, exciting things can happen. Thank you for listening to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. If you'd like to listen to more, make sure you subscribe at podcast.crescent-theatre.co.uk or via Spotify, Google or Apple Podcasts to get the next episode.
You can find out more about the Crescent Theatre Birmingham and our upcoming productions, including The Lovely Bones, by visiting www.crescent-theatre.co.uk or by following us on social media.
Amateur of Life and Death is a Crescent Theatre production. It is researched and presented by Laura East, John O'Neill and Luke Plimmer, with research by Jessica Siposh. The music is by Brendan Stanley. The podcast is edited by Kevin Middleton.